it's Katie with Rosie Reads. I'm excited to see you guys this week, and we're talking all about space and rockets in all of our online content. So the book we're going to read is Counting on Katherine, How Katherine Johnson Saved Apollo 13 by Helaine Becker and illustrated by Dow Fumerick. Now, as always, there are three things I want you to think about while we're reading the book. The first thing I want you to think about is what happened to Katherine? What challenge did she face when she was trying to go to school growing up? Now, the second thing I want you to think about is what her job at NASA was. What was its name and what did she do? And then the third thing I want you to think about is how Katherine helped save Apollo 13. So those are our three things to think about. Let's get started. Counting on Katherine. Katherine loved to count. She counted the steps to the road, the steps up to church, the number of dishes and spoons she washed in the bright white sink. The only things she didn't count were the stars in the sky. Only a fool, she thought, would try that. Even so, the stars sparked her imagination. What was out there? Katherine yearned to know as much as she could about numbers, about the universe, about everything. Katherine's boundless curiosity turned her into a star student. She was so bright, she skipped 3 whole grades. She catapulted right past her brother. He wasn't too happy about that. By the time she turned 10, Katherine was ready for high school. She was 10 and she was going to high school. But back then, America was legally segregated by race. Her town's high school didn't admit black students of any age. Katherine burned with fury. She wanted, more than anything, to keep learning. There was still so much to know. Count on me, Katherine's father told her. By working night and day, he earned enough money to move the family to a town with a black high school. So they moved from White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, to Institute, West Virginia. Katherine loved high school. She was good at every subject, but math was still her favorite. She dreamed of becoming a research mathematician, making discoveries about the number patterns that are the foundation of our universe. In those days, though, there were no jobs as research mathematicians for women. Professions most available to them were teaching and nursing. So Katherine became an elementary school teacher. She liked her job, and she loved her students, but she never stopped dreaming about exploring numbers. In the 1950s, the U.S. government's National Advisory Committee on Aeronautics, NACA, hired thousands of new employees. It even started hiring black women as mathematicians. Katherine heard about the mathematician jobs. Her heart raced with excitement. Perhaps her dream could come true after all. But when she applied for one of the positions, she was told they were already filled. Katherine had to wait a whole year until new spots opened up. Her patience paid off. She got the job. A few years later, the Soviet Union sent a rocket ship into space, launching a space race with the United States. NACA was rolled into a new space agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or one you've probably heard of, NASA. Katherine now found herself at the heart of America's space program. She worked as a computer. Electronic computers were not widely used yet, calculating long series of numbers. All the computers were women. They were given the tasks that men thought were boring and unimportant. That didn't bother Katherine. She knew that without her contributions, a spaceship couldn't reach its destination, nor safely return to Earth. Here's why. Sending a rocket ship into space is like throwing a ball into the air. At first, the force of the throw sends the ball up, 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 but as soon as its energy runs out, the ball's path curves back toward the ground. Where it lands depends on what angle it was thrown and how high and how fast it flew. Because math is a kind of language, Katherine could ask those questions. How high would the rocket ship go and how fast would it travel? Using numbers, and numbers would provide the all-important answer. Where would it land? To find out, Katherine plotted the numbers she'd calculated on a graph. When she joined the points together, they formed a curved line. At one end of that line was Earth at the time the rocket ship launched. At the other was where Earth would be when the ship landed. Katherine's reputation for accuracy and strong leadership skills, she was known for asking plenty of questions, which we all should do, we should always ask questions, got her promoted to Project Mercury, a new program designed to send the first American astronauts into space. Mercury's missions were going to be dangerous, so dangerous that even the project's star astronaut, John Glenn, refused to fly unless Katherine okayed the numbers. "You can count on me," she said. Glenn's spacecraft, Friendship 7, orbited Earth 3 times and returned home safely. Glenn became a national hero. Katherine was promoted again. Now she was asked to calculate the flight paths for Project Apollo, the first flights to the moon. "Count on me," she said. On July 20th, 1969, the Apollo 11 astronauts walked on the moon. Their feat was celebrated around the world. More triumphs followed. Apollo 12 rocketed to the moon in November 1969. Apollo 13 launched on April 11, 1970, but on the third day of Apollo's 13th flight, the worst thing happened: an explosion in space. Could the crippled spaceship make it to the moon? And if it didn't, would it be able to get back home to Earth? The 3 astronauts on board were in grave peril. Commander Jim Lovell told Mission Control, "Houston, we've had a problem." Back on Earth, Katherine Johnson got a phone call. Her flight path calculations would have to be done all over again, and perfectly. It would be the toughest challenge of her life. Katherine told Mission Control, "You can count on me." She rolled up her sleeves, took a deep breath, and began doing the math. She worked hard and fast. A few hours later, Katherine's calculations were finished. The flight path to return home would take the ship around the far side of the moon. From there, the moon's gravity would act like a slingshot to zing the ship back to Earth. To get home, the crew of Apollo 13 would have to follow Katherine's course exactly by burning off fuel at precise intervals. If the astronauts made a mistake, their ship would drift through space forever. Katherine waited anxiously to hear the astronauts' report. Finally, it crackled over the loudspeakers. "We've got it!" Apollo 13 was back on track. Katherine Johnson had done it. She'd brought Apollo 13 home. She was no longer the kid who dreamed of what lay beyond the stars. She was now a star herself. The end. So, I asked you to think about 3 things while we were reading. And the first thing I asked you to think about was what challenge Katherine faced while she was going to school. Now, Katherine grew up in the 1910s and the 1920s, and in the United States during that time, schools and a lot of other public places were legally segregated. So what does that mean? It means there was a school for white children and there was a school for black children. And in Katherine's town, there was no high school for black children. So her family had to move in order for her to continue her education. Now that's not fair, it's not right, and it's not just. And that's why it's so important we tell stories and understand stories like Katherine's and other Black Americans, so we learn about our history, we understand what segregation laws like that did and how they've impacted our society today, and That way we can work to make things better. And you as a kid can do just that. You can read stories like Katherine's, you can learn about history, and you can apply those lessons to what we can do today to make things better. So the other thing I asked you to think about was what Katherine's job was when she worked at NASA. And her job was, she was a computer. And that sounds super funny, right? Because today we think about computers as tiny little things we hold in our hand, essentially our phones and laptops, and how we get information. And they're machines, right? But in the 50s, when Katherine was working at NASA, computers were just starting to catch on. They were huge. They took up enormous spaces, like multiple rooms. And they took a lot of time to do calculations. So Katherine and other Black women like her were human computers. They did all the math and all those calculations themselves. So Katherine was a computer. Now, the third thing I asked you to remember and think about from the book was what she did to help Apollo 13. So Apollo 13 experienced an explosion while it was on its trip on day 3. And essentially, Katherine had to rework all the calculations to get the ship home. And that's hard because in the book it talks about trajectory, right? All the things that determine it. The force of the thrust upward, the gravity of the Earth, the gravity of the moon was pulling on the ship too. And so Katherine had to figure out after what happened during the explosion, how she could use all these new factors and calculate the trajectory to get the rocket back home. And she did it. The astronauts came back to Earth safely, and it was an amazing feat and just showed how brilliant Katherine was and also how she could work under pressure, because that was really tough, right? She had a couple hours to figure this out. So this week, for your activity to go along with counting on Katherine, we want you to design a rocket. We want you to think about things like trajectory and gravity and force and where you want to go in space and how your rocket would get there, what it would look like, what it would need to have, and really think big. Design it, draw it, and post it in the comments and show us ideally what it would be like, how big it would be, what it would be made of, everything like that. But also, once you've gotten kind of the idea for your rocket, think about how you would translate it to paper, because on Friday for Rosie Makes, we're going to learn about all these different factors that go into space flight and design our own rockets with paper. So you'll be all ready for Rosie Makes on Friday. Thanks so much for joining Rosie Reads with us, and we'll see you later this week. Bye, everyone.